Welcome to Paradox. I'm your host, Benjamin Gilbert-Lif, and, just like the automobile, I too am powered by a liquid humans should not drink. And there it is. Today we're going to be talking about the automobile and us. Welcome back. The automobile, now commonly known as the place where I was conceived, was and is one of the most influential inventions of literally ever. And similar to other inventions of its caliber, it paved the way for much of what we consider normal today, from travel to trade to reproduction and childbirth. The car has had a hand in almost every conceivable aspect of our lives, whether it's the way we receive goods, the places we live, or even the way specifically Americans see themselves in the world. The car has, one way or another, influenced it all. The incalculable effects of the automobile have vastly improved every aspect of human life. It triggered the creation of both the most robust production system and economies ever devised. It aided the creation and stability of many of the world's middle classes. It revolutionized much of what we consider to be, in fact, infrastructure, and has played its part in entirely devastating the Earth's environment. It can't all be good. But before we drive any further, some context. All right. Around the turn of the 20th century, alongside inventions like the telephone, the motion picture, and penicillin, a powerful new technology would instantly capture everyone's hearts and minds. Invented by Carl Benz in Germany, 1885, the Benz patent motor wagon is now widely considered the first car. This is because it was the first consumer-friendly anything to be self-propelled by some sort of motorized device. That device being a hamster in a wheel. It's true. Okay, it's definitely not. Actually, it was an internal combustion engine. Arguably less revolutionary than the aforementioned. Okay, fine. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, I see. This handsome person thinks that some German inventimated the first car. Not true. Enter. American Henry Ford. But unlike what many people, including myself, were taught in school, the first car wasn't the Model T, and it wasn't invented by Henry Ford. However, he was instrumental in the widespread use and distribution of the car. Henry Ford is remembered the way he is, not necessarily because of the Model T, but because of how he made it. Knowing that mass adoption of his Model T could be doomed without a simple way to manufacture it, Henry Ford devised a system of production equally as revolutionary as his car: the assembly line. And for the four of you who don't know, the assembly line, pictured here, is a highly popular system of production where one person repeats a task on a series of identical items, which are then sent to another person who does the same, progressively building something. If it's difficult for you to imagine, then look up from your phone at the Chipotle worker who is currently making your food as a visual aid. Companies and Chipotles alike use the assembly line for production because it is significantly more efficient than the monotonous work of building something by hand, over and over again. But okay, that's enough background. Now to your regularly scheduled paradox. The economic implications of the car on our current society are staggering. 6 of the top 50 companies in the world are automotive, making up a $1.4 trillion industry. This is more money than these 6 small, albeit horrible, countries combined. Between the 17.5 million cars purchased each year, the almost 8 million jobs provided in the U.S. alone, and the fact that half of the Dow Jones Index is dependent on automotive revenues, the automotive industry has a Vulcan death grip on our economy and our politics, directly resulting in DMVs and car dealerships. And do I really need a joke here to explain why that's not great? Regardless of the current economic impacts, the automobile and the assembly line that would be so essential to its production would lead to other developments that would be felt across the economic spectrum, specifically advancements in mass manufacturing of other goods, employment, and trade. As I stated moments ago, the car's mass production directly led to the inception of the assembly line. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, the assembly line was uniquely equipped for the era it was invented in. Before the assembly line, most goods were made by hand in what was often referred to as cottage industries. The assembly line allowed these industries to move out of households and into factory settings, leading to goods being made at a dramatically faster rate. After implementing his assembly line, Henry Ford was able to create his Model T in 2.5 hours as opposed to 12, a literal fraction of the time. This drastic shift in manufacturing style and speed is today commonly referred to as the technological revolution. The assembly line essentially ensured that anything that could be produced could also be mass-produced, and along with the benefits of quicker production, it also caused a large demand for unskilled labor. The assembly line required a large amount of workers to be efficient. This would aid in the creation of an innumerable amount of new jobs that would later be taken away by machines. These new jobs helped propel the development of the Western world's middle class that exists today throughout most developed countries. The assembly line, and most importantly, the car, had an impact on our middle class by improving many employment opportunities. As adoption of the assembly line increased, new middle management positions began to be offered as a way to oversee the unskilled assembly workers, and new consumer stores began to grow in and out of urban areas to cater to the increased net worth of factory workers. This led to the further development of economic industries, especially those related to service, causing an explosion of new job opportunities across the developed world. All of this in tandem led to many of the luxuries only seen by the highest classes to be available to the public today, growing the sense of consumerism felt across the world, and as shown by my desk. And with many industrial factories now beginning to pop up, the assembly line had brought the jobs, and the car would bring the mobility to reach them. Because of this, the car offered newer generations a better chance of social and economic mobility. The car allowed people to not only drive to the nearest job, but the opportunity to search for a better, safer, and higher paying one in the vicinity. Farm workers, for example, used the car to move across country into the inner cities to work at factories, while higher class elites who formerly occupied those areas moved into the suburbs, inevitably leading to growth in employment opportunities in those areas as well. With all these new factory jobs making goods and retail jobs selling them, local interstate trade would become an essential component of our society, helping maintain this brave new world. The automobile helped revolutionize interstate trade. Prior to the car, the majority of trade was done via train or ship. However, both have their limitations. When the car came around, it allowed for intrastate range and capacity to dramatically increase. Specifically, the car let people transport goods over small areas quickly, which eventually led to people wanting to transport even larger quantities of goods with the same amount of expediency. Trains were fast, but they were limited to where their tracks were placed, and unless you're Link the hero of trains for some reason, most freight trains weren't going to go just a couple miles down the road. However, with the advent of the truck, large quantities of factory goods could be transported quickly and cheaply to nearby stores. While boats did have much more cargo space, to say the least, they were also limited to major coastal cities, and with the onset of inland suburban towns, cars were essential for transporting goods to these locations. But to do so, major investments in vehicular infrastructure would become necessary to facilitate this new type of trade. In the early 20th century, infrastructure as we knew it today became a vital aspect of our society. Today's infrastructure was built entirely around the commercial usage of cars. Whether it was for trade, travel, or relocation, it became obvious that a vast network of paved roads would become necessary to maintain and increase the economic prosperity brought by the automobile. For us today, the idea of an expansive road stretching hundreds of thousands of miles is something we consider part of our normal life. However, I urge you to consider how daunting this task must have seemed with the technologies of the early 20th century. These roads would become the backbone of our infrastructural system, leading to further development of cities and suburbs. The car's effect on infrastructure instigated a tectonic shift in our urban landscape. In cities, roads paved over markets and walkways, creating the gridded system we see today, while the influx of cars in cities due to roads had a direct link to the growth of commercial and residential activity, ostensibly turning cities from this, well, into this. The 20th century really could have done with some urban planners. These new commercial and residential hotspots are what brought so many of the workers we talked about earlier into these cities. Yet there were some perceived negatives. Due to the fact that many roads were paved atop public walkways, in the early days of the automobile, many pedestrians were killed in violent cartoon-style car crashes in these cities. And for a short period of time, many people began protesting the use of cars in dense city centers, beginning to affect real change. So as a way to protect profits, several automotive companies banded together to sway public opinion, creating the term jaywalking, which at the term jay was a derogatory term for a hysterical woman, as a way to blame pedestrians for causing car accidents. And today, almost a century later, jaywalking is a crime. Go America. Another negative was many wealthy citizens didn't like living in these new crowded industrial centers, eventually causing them to move out of cities into developing suburban areas. Ironically, these suburbs themselves could only remain feasible due to the range and mobility that caused the workers to move into the cities in the first place. Thanks to the car, it was possible to have these communities further inland and further away from cities and coasts. And it was because of the car that items such as foods, goods, and amenities were able to reach these new communities. However, the most significant thing that allowed the suburban communities to grow was the highway. Politicians knew that it would be beneficial to create a vast network of high-speed roads to connect major cities with these wealthy towns, allowing those workers to commute into the cities for jobs. However, highways did have one major drawback. They were often paved directly through residential city centers. And according to Vox Online, this was no accident. These highways were built directly through African American cultural centers and neighborhoods as a way to marginalize, diminish, and control the growth of black communities. Anyway, it's important to mention the vast effects the car had on public transportation. That being said, the only thing I would rather do less than talk about public transportation is to use any form of it in this country. So, next. Alongside the economic impacts discussed thus far, there were also several social and cultural impacts as well, one of which being the so-called leisure class. The idea of a leisure culture is that at a certain point, amenities only seen by the highest classes could now be shared by the masses. We've talked about this already. Essentially, many historians agree that the advent of the automobile facilitated, if not caused, the leisure culture seen in American and European countries today. At one point, higher paying wages, the ability to travel, and luxurious amenities were only offered to the richest members of society, but due to the car, this was no longer the case. Drastic reductions in prices across virtually all industries and services meant that, as Ford said, luxury, convenience, and freedom could be brought to the masses. The car's vast economic impacts increased the common man's ability to traverse and enjoy all life had to offer. Ideas such as the weekend drive, the wide open road, and the weekend getaway all are manifestations of this leisure class brought by the automobile, as well as many new recreational activities which would come into play in the mid to late 20th century. The leisure class would all come to a head during the bombastic car-loving era of the 1950s. The car. During the 1950s to 70s, there was no single piece of Americana which rang quite as loud as the roaring hum of a muscle car engine. In America, the car became something that it didn't in literally every other country in the world. A symbol of freedom, just like America, baby. Media such as, and especially television, showed a scenic and majestic view of America. The beaches of Miami and California, the hustling and bustling inner cities of New York, Chicago, and Boston, and the majesty of the Grand Canyon and Rocky Mountains. Television brought the wonder, and the car brought the chicks, and also the ability to visit that wonder. The American identity in the 50s became wrapped up with the car. Muscle cars, street racing, car sports like hot rods, NASCAR, and drag. The racing, not the other thing. Pop culture like film, television, and music idealized the car and what it represented. Yeah, it represented freedom, but you know what else it represented? America. And what's more American than fast food restaurants, malls, car dealerships? Okay, maybe not that last one. One sec. Drive-in movie theaters. It was America. And so are service industries that only could have been created because of the car. Everyone wanted to have a car, and now decades later, this created a deep culture that everyone should have a car. Even our official government IDs are driver's license. Because the car is so ubiquitous to human life, hipsters find it cool not to use them. There was nothing like the car, which is why for 7 decades we ignored one not insignificant problem. The car, and evident mass production, has had a major effect on our environment. It has become increasingly clear that infrastructure needed to support the car is harmful to both the Earth's physical landscape as well as the non-human creatures which live on it. The system of roads we use to travel every day, especially ones like highways, disrupt animal populations and their breeding and hunting grounds, breaking them up and confining them to lands which for certain animals isn't large enough or doesn't have the correct types of food for them to survive. In those cases, animals often cross these treacherous roads in the world's most surreal game of Frogger, often coming to the same conclusion. One U.S. Commission study found that up to 1 million animals die this way each year in the U.S. alone, and the numbers are increasing. These statistics all paint the same picture, that animals which can't adopt to smaller territories die out either slowly or at 75 miles an hour. But it's not just land animals at risk from our dependency on cars. Sea creatures aren't going to escape our accidental wrath either. As the rate to which Americans drive each year increases, so does the demand for drilling oil. Ignoring all the little ways it impacts our environment, oil drilling, especially at sea, poses one major risk to marine life, and it comes in the form of 2 words: oil spills. Increased drilling activity increases the risk of massively dangerous and unbelievably expensive spills. During periods of increased oil drilling comes increased amounts of wildlife devastating spills. These undisputed disasters kill marine life by suffocating them and poisoning them in crude oil contamination. But even when nothing goes wrong and the oil safely makes it into the back of your gas tank for an average of $2 a gallon, it's still harmful to the overall environment. Auto emissions resulted from burning gasoline significantly contribute to the rising rates of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere. In the US alone, over 25% of our CO2 emissions come directly from cars' exhaust ports. All of these impacts take their place as causes for the rapidly changing global environment and climate we see today. Changes which further threaten the safety and stability of our physical landscape. But one more thing bothers me in particular. It does not even make fiscal sense to stay along this path. Animal-to-vehicle collisions cost upward of $8 million each year in the U.S. Green energy in general is much more affordable than natural gas, and that's without factoring in the cost of spills, and excessive CO2 in the atmosphere threatens to destabilize the world's economy through climate change. However, some lawmakers have begun to take notice. To preserve wildlife populations, animal overpasses have been commissioned all throughout the U.S. Many traditionally oil-based companies have partially began adopting newer, more renewable energy resources, and, though U.S. politicians may not give a damn, companies like Ford, Tesla, and Chevy have all started working on releasing electric cars, making them more and more ubiquitous with each passing day. Leading the trend is automaker Volvo, going all electric by the end of next year. It seems that there is hope on the horizon. In conclusion, the car has undoubtedly had a significant impact on our lives. It has raised our quality of life by increasing convenience and leisure, caused several major shifts in both how and where we live. It led to the inception of most revolutionary manufacturing process the world has ever known. And it's slowly helping usher in a new world of hell and fire, ironically juxtaposed by rising waters. So, never say the car never did anything for you. Thank you for watching Paradox, and we'll be back in like a year, probably.